Will the United States remove its nuclear weapons from Europe? The nightmare situation is haunting Europeans.
That the United States is the nuclear umbrella over Europe.
Friedrich Merz is calling for a discussion on nuclear sharing with France and Britain.
Last instance we observed a momentous conflict between Ukraine and Russia was in the United Kingdom, where a vast number of EU authorities, accompanied by the UK Prime Minister, assembled against Russia. The primary objective of the gathering was to address the problem while the US and EU continue to hold tactical disagreement over Russia's assault on Ukraine after an intense Oval Office summit between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian leader Zelensky failed to yield any outcome. The preceding day before this summit, French President Emmanuel Macron presented a proposition to EU members so remarkable that it virtually neutralized Russia's most formidable military assets. The proposition was for the EU to collectively undertake an immense nuclear armament initiative. We will now analyze this astonishing proposition by the French leader in depth and uncover the benefits it could provide for the EU against Russia, as well as how it might corner Putin. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, enable notifications, and support us so that you can stay updated with our content. Now, let's not squander any time and return to our principal discussion. In a recent discussion, French President Emmanuel Macron expressed his readiness to commence deliberations on nuclear deterrent for Europe. His statement comes as Europe grapples with the US President Donald Trump's inclination toward Russia diplomacy and the aftermath of the exceptional confrontation between Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House on Friday. The remarkable aspect of these remarks by the French president was their appearance in the media a day prior to conference in London on the Ukrainian war, which brought together Zelensky and more than a dozen European leaders. Emmanuel Macron suggested a strategic conversation with European nations that lack nuclear weapons. France and the United Kingdom are the sole European nations possessing nuclear arsenals. On the other hand, he argued that EU nations without nuclear weapons have no safeguard and can no longer depend on the US nuclear shield. CDU leader Friedrich Merz, anticipated to be Germany's next chancellor, proposed that the UK and France could potentially share nuclear weapons in the future. French leader Emmanuel, who received a warm reception from Mr. Merz, stated that establishing an autonomous European defense independent of NATO will take between 5 and 10 years. He also stressed that the alliance could fracture if the US reached an agreement with Russia without European representation at the table, which is why a collective nuclear security framework must be formed promptly. Macron's remarkable proposition was, of course, a major topic of discussion in France. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen responded to Macron's statements. While visiting the Paris Agriculture, Marine suggested that the nuclear deterrent of our nation should remain a French nuclear deterrent.
La dissuasion nucléaire française doit rester une dissuasion nucléaire française.
That a government interest include a European aspect but remain under the exclusive jurisdiction of the head of state. So, what missions and action did Macron's EU collective nuclear security initiative, which has sparked such intense reactions in France, entail? First and foremost, the Paris administration proposed providing Germany with fighter jets equipped with nuclear weapons to counter fighter jets armed with nuclear warheads. This dramatic proposal was viewed as direct reaction to Friedrich Merz, Germany's probable next chancellor, and the UK and France to extend nuclear protection to Germany after the CDU party's electoral victory in Germany. It was highlighted that under Donald Trump, Europe should strive for greater autonomy from the United States. France's maneuver appears to align with diplomatic assertions in Berlin that this initiative will compel Prime Minister to make parallel pledge toward European security. In other words, the UK faction could also be strategizing to station nuclear-capable resources in Germany. France's nuclear weapon stockpile consists of roughly 300 warheads, while the UK's Trident system is reliant on submarine-launched missiles. The US has stationed approximately 100 nuclear missiles in Germany as part of its NATO obligations. Britain's nuclear deterrent is integrated into the alliance, whereas France upholds an independent nuclear arsenal. Reports indicate a substantial nuclear capability in Europe, and unity on this matter could pressure the Kremlin into the retreat, particularly as nuclear armaments are among the key leverage points that Russia President Vladimir Putin frequently references. Due to Putin's nuclear threats, the world is now preparing for a nuclear warfare scenario. Against Russia's arsenal of 5,580 nuclear warheads, the United States possesses 5,044, the United Kingdom 225, the France 290 of this classification. In terms of sheer quantity, Russia holds a notable advantage. Consequently, the EU might require the US as nuclear deterrent against Russia. The predicament becomes even more pressing when considering Russia's deterrent missiles, the Oreshnik. The missile travels at tenfold the speed of sound, capable of reaching distances of approximately 2.5 to 3.5 per second.
Its maximum range of 5,500 kilometers enables it to strike most of Europe and even the western US, reaching Berlin within 15 minutes and London within 20 minutes. However, contrary to common fears, it means that the hazelnut tree is not as worrisome as Putin portrays it. When launched, the missile rapidly accelerates using its rocket engines until it ascends into the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere, where it releases its initial stage rocket that deplete their fuel. Multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles are then discharged, navigating through space towards their designated targets. The system is most vulnerable when traveling at its lowest velocity. The Russian warheads can be directed independently, making defense against these missiles exceedingly challenging. Capable of carrying 6 to 8 nuclear warheads, the missile's intended targets remain unknown until the final moment. Its trajectory from the atmospheric boundary enables it to achieve speeds that render tracking and interception arduous. Russia fully recognizes the formidable capabilities of this ballistic missile force. In fact, fresh plans are already underway
For the Oreshnik,
Putin has announced that missile testing will persist and declared that Russia might deploy the novel Oreshnik medium-range hypersonic missile within Belarusian territory in the later half of the following year. This development reignited the contentious debate over Russian nuclear armament in Belarus, which took place last year. Russia's modifications to its nuclear policy have further compelled the EU to adopt urgent security measures. Russian President Vladimir Putin revealed substantial reversions to Russia's nuclear doctrine in response to what Moscow perceives as escalating Western involvement in Ukraine. On Tuesday, November 19th, he formalized the modifications as the official stance of the Russian Federation. The updated doctrine, titled Fundamentals of the State Policy of the Russian Federation in the Atmosphere of Nuclear Deterrence, broadens the conditions under which Putin may employ nuclear weapons. The Moscow administration is now prepared to use nuclear armaments in retaliation for nuclear assaults and conventional offensive that jeopardize the sovereignty or territorial integrity of Russia and Belarus. Before November 2024 amendments, Russia's nuclear policy in 2020 had already sanctioned a nuclear response to conventional military attacks. However, the previous doctrine was only applicable in scenarios where the state's existence was imperiled. With this revision, Putin explicitly extended Russia's nuclear protection to Belarus, framing it as an obligation under the Union State Treaty between the two nations. During the press briefing, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, found that these modifications signify that Russian Federation reserves the prerogative to deploy nuclear weapons in response to conventional attacks on itself or the Republic of Belarus. Russian security official has also voiced apprehensions on these subjects, asserting that if nuclear armaments were supplied to Ukraine, Moscow might construe such an action as an assault on Russia, potentially justifying a nuclear reprisal. However, one crucial factor overlooked by Putin prior is the European response to such threats, including nuclear-capable fighter jets, deployments in Germany, and potential actions from Poland. With growing military tensions, the discourse surrounding nuclear security has become more urgent than ever. Thank you for watching.